Kia ora everybody and welcome to Property Brokers. It's a while since we've done one of these webinars. It's not really a webinar. We're doing a bit of an interview. I'm David Faulkner. I'm the head of Property Brokers Property Management. It's always a pleasure to get in front of people, even though it's virtually. And with me this evening is Matt Ball. Matt, thanks for coming along. You're a busy man. I know that you've got a speaking engagement later on this evening with the Manawatu Property Investors Association. Matt, so you're the advocacy manager for New Zealand Property Investors Federation. Yep. So just give us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll go into what the NZPIF and NZPIA is about.
Sure thing. So I've had a long career in politics and media and public relations and all those sort of things. I used to work for Ports of Auckland for 10 years for my sins. Some of you may have seen me on the TV, standing up for Ports of Auckland.
Right.
I've worked in the UK, where you're from, and I worked there for London Underground,
right.
for British Rail, and then before that I worked in the New Zealand Parliament. So I spent some time working for Richard Prebble, which is a very interesting...
Richard Prebble.
Richard Prebble, the Richard Prebble,
yeah.
One of the founders of ACT. So yeah, I have that long history. I got into the property investors in June last year when they decided to start hiring someone to do the work for them down in Parliament.
Okay. So, I mean, first of all, I'm assuming you're a landlord yourself and you've got an interest in property investments. How long has the New Zealand Property Investors Federation been in existence, and how did it come to fruition? How did it evolve?
Sure. So yes, I am a landlord. I used to have investment properties in Wellington.
Right.
Sold those down to fund a renovation up in Auckland. It's very expensive up in Auckland. And we have one investment property in Auckland, which I self-manage.
Right, okay.
It's only next door, so I don't need a property manager. But I used to have a property manager in Wellington. Amazing.
Yeah.
When we were living in the UK, he was absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
So yes, I am steeped in the industry. I mean, we've had investment properties probably 30 years now. I never got big, which is a shame. I should have joined my local Property Investors Association back in 1996, but I didn't.
So how long have they been going for?
A long time. I don't know when the association started. So I work for the Federation, which the Federation has been in existence for about 40 years, actually. It's our anniversary this year. The Federation was started by the different associations around the country. Yeah. The association started sort of as clubs for property investors to get together and share ideas and support each other and work. Maybe they could collaborate to work with the local authority to try and make things better for them. But at a certain point, 40 years ago, they thought, we need national representation. Laws are starting to change. We need a voice in Wellington. Yeah. And so they've been doing that for the last 40 years or so. It's been a voluntary organisation up until last year. And because of some of the changes that were made by previous Labor governments, they really felt the need to professionalise, to actually have someone who can work, I'm not full-time, but at least part-time down in Wellington, and someone with a bit of experience in dealing with politicians, a background in politics, a background in media.
Because isn't it true that you actually ran for Parliament once? Is it?
I've run for Parliament twice.
Twice?
Yeah, once for the Greens and once for ACT. So I like to say I span the entire political
So you're a bit of a teal type of candidate.
Actually, I would be a bit of a teal candidate. I'm a small government, but I love the environment. Yeah, it's quite important to me. Being able to breathe.
Yeah. So I mean, obviously, then you've had that background dealing with certain MPs. I mean, Richard Prebble's very well known, and I mean, how easy is it to get access to some of these ministers? I mean, like Chris Bishop, for example, or I mean, you've probably not worked with Megan Woods, but did you work with the Labour ministers in the past?
Yeah. So, I mean, politicians need to talk to people. That's their job. They're there to represent the people, and it doesn't matter what side you come from, you still need to represent people's interests. So actually, if you just ask a politician, can I meet with you, 9 times out of 10, you'll get a yes. Yeah. It's absolutely true. I think what you're getting at with Chris Bishop is that, the National Party, ACT, and New Zealand First, to a certain extent, are much more on the side of business. Yeah. So much more on the side of property investors, property managers, than, say, the Maori Party and the Greens are,
Yeah.
and Labour is in between that.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
So one of the things that I really found when I first started this role is that we were very much only talking to National and ACT. And that's what I wanted to change. So we have great access to Chris Bishop. He's a great guy. He's been really supportive. There are some fantastic law changes that have been made that help investors and actually tilt the playing field back towards more level. Labour, we didn't really have a foot in the door. And I'm pleased to say that we've already met with Kieran McAnulty.
Yep.
He's a good dude.
He's a good Wairarapa man, isn't he?
He's a good Wairarapa man.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, he's very blunt and straightforward. You know, he doesn't want to be dicked around. And he's not necessarily going to agree with us on policies.
No, of course not. No,
I asked him straight out, are you going to bring back, or are you going to take away, interest deductibility again? And he said, haven't decided yet.
Yeah.
So, you know, he could do that.
Yeah.
Or Labour could do that still.
Yeah.
But the door is open and we're talking to them. Same with the Greens.
Yeah.
We met with the Greens early last month. First time we've met with the Greens for God knows how long. It was a good meeting, despite the fact that, you know, they really don't see eye to eye. They think rent controls are a fantastic idea.
I know they do. Yeah.
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 That said, there's an opening.
Yeah.
And we can, you know, we can push. We can talk to them, and maybe we can soften some of the edges.
How do you think? I mean, you know, we're going off point a little bit, but it's always this is a good discussion.
Yeah.
I mean, the interest deductibility. I mean, which caused a lot of damage.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think? I've got a feeling that Labour, if they ever got back in, they may think that may not have been a good idea, because what we're seeing at the moment is that rents have actually levelled off a wee bit.
Yeah.
You know, do you think they've learned from the mistakes? If we, you know, I think we can all agree here that it was a mistake.
Huge mistake. It was an outrageous thing to do. The honest answer is they've half learned. It's still there. They're still talking about it. They still talk about the landlords getting the tax break. I listened to Leanne Dalzell purely by chance. I heard her on Radio New Zealand earlier this week. Now, Leanne Dalzell, she's not an MP anymore, She's not the Mayor of Christchurch, but she's still a big beast in the Labour Party. She is influential. And she was talking about, the landlord's got this great tax break, and they've got this and that and the other thing. She was going on about, what was it, the rent subsidy for low-income people, and how that was a fantastic bonus for landlords, and wasn't the government lovely for giving us all that money. That is the sort of thing that we're dealing with. And unless we talk to them, and unless we can actually do some decent research and present them with facts, we need facts, we need data.
Yeah, yeah.
We won't change their mind.
We'll come on to data in a moment. But first of all, I mean, one of the things I noticed, and just talking to you before we come on air, you've got the NZPIF and the NZPIA.
Yep.
Can you explain to our viewers and our listeners what the difference is between the two groups are?
100%. So the associations are fantastic little beasts. I wish I'd joined one, as I said, many years ago. If you want to learn about property investing, that is a fantastic place to go. If you are just starting out in the business, or you're wanting to grow, or you just want a bit of support from people who are also in the industry, these are fantastic organisations to join. Join up, membership fees tax deductible. They have meetings every month, which is fantastic. You can go along and meet like-minded people. They have very good speakers, including yourself, I believe. You may talk at one tonight.
I'm talking at one tonight. I've been asked to come in and do a little bit of a market update.
So there's that fantastic wraparound support that you get from joining an association. Now, you might not want to go to meetings. The other thing that's brilliant is that we have some great discounts with national organisations, nationwide organisations. So, for example, Bunnings, you can get really good discounts on your Bunnings products. And if you join up to the Power Pass, there's various hoops you have to jump through, but it's not that complex. Really easy. It makes your Bunnings existence really easy, and you get a good discount. We have a tie-up with Initio Insurance.
Right.
That's also fantastic. And the thing you shouldn't forget, you might only have one investment property, but you've probably got a house.
Yeah.
I got way more than my membership fee back in
So
discounts
it
when I
becomes
switched my insurance.
cost neutral. If anything, it
I've
can
made
make
money.
being a member makes you money.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
100%.
Okay.
So that's the benefit of an association. It's local people who know the market, great people to get involved with. The federation is the advocacy arm and the education arm. We have a great education resource called Rent Skills, which will teach you more about what you should do as a property investor. It was initially aimed at investors who self-manage, but it's good for all investors. You know, even if you're using a property manager, you should understand the law.
Listen, what we find with property brokers, we actually try to become a bit of an education to our landlords and our tenants.
Yeah.
You know, because landlords may not understand why we do certain things. Like, for example, when a tenant leaves a house, that it's only got to be reasonably clean.
Yeah.
And there has to be some cleaning at a landlord's cost at the end of a tenancy. Now, unless you explain that to a landlord, they're thinking, well, shouldn't the tenant be paying for this? Yeah. You know, so these are the type of things, and also making sure they're aware of what their responsibilities are as a landlord and what the consequences are. It's not a case of, here's the property, see you later, forget about it. So you're dead right, there's an education piece there.
So the Federation does that education, which is great, but you know, our main thing is the advocacy. The political advocacy, but also in the media. You may see me pop up on the TV, hopefully
I have seen you pop up in the TV.
Excellent.
Yep.
That's our job. You know, the media narrative is really important for setting the political narrative. If you lose control of the media narrative, you also lose control of the political narrative, or it becomes much harder to get them back. So you've got to do both at the same time. And, you know, countering those things, you know, that thought that landlords are all fat cats living off the back of their tenants. I did a little bit of research recently. Over 85% of property investors, individuals, have either a job or are self-employed. Yeah. You know, so they're just your typical working Kiwis who have an investment on the side and they're just trying to secure their own future.
And a lot, and put myself in this bag, where you're topping up, the rent doesn't cover your expenses, so you have to put money in to make it work. But you know that sometimes that doesn't get across,
especially in the early years, right?
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, approximately, I mean, you talk about data, you talk about research.
Yep.
Would you have any idea how many landlords there are in New Zealand? Because it is not easy to find this information.
No, it's not. It's funny you should ask that, David. I did a little bit of research. Now, when I first started the role, I looked up a few numbers, and I think it was around 100 and something thousand, or maybe close to 200,000 landlords apparently in New Zealand.
Right.
But that was taken from the bond numbers. And as we know, not all landlords submit a bond. Either they don't require one.
Well, apparently there's over 600,000, 660,000 rental properties in New Zealand. And you go onto the bond data, as you know, it's about, what, 480,000?
So there's quite a lot that aren't covered.
So there's a lot not, yeah.
But what I did, I went to the Inland Revenue, and as long as you're not doing it, you know, under the table, you have to report your income. It's much harder to avoid the tax man than tenancy services. So what I found out is there's approximately 304,000 property investors in New Zealand. So this is individual or company or trusts taxpayers who report rental income. The majority of those are individuals, about 270 odd thousand. Yeah. And then the rest are made up of companies and trusts, and there's a few dribs and drabs in there as well. Right. So about 304,000. It's a big voting block.
Yeah. I mean, when I look at our client base we got 8,500 properties that we manage, but I'd say 90% of our clients as landlords will own no more than 2 properties. The vast majority will own 1. Some will own 2. You get a small percentage which own a lot. What do you think of the stumbling blocks here? Because I'm sure that people don't go into it just get 1 property. You know.
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, some of it is I'm just happy with 1 property. I'll buy that one. It's a bit like me. Yeah. You know, we've got the 1. Maybe we'll get another one. Maybe we'll get a 3rd. But honestly, do I want to do it as a full-time job? No. Yeah. And that's enough to to give you a bit of something to hand to the kids maybe, and to help with the retirement.
Yeah. Okay. Go back onto data. So,
Yep.
you know, clearly, you know, you like your data. I like my data.
Yeah.
And I find it frustrating looking at tenancy services. I mean, you know, what are the things, because as you say, there's approximately 200,000 bonds there, or, you know, maybe a little bit less,
Yeah.
which they're not accounted for. So it's hard to know. And the more information we get, the better we can plan infrastructure around towns where we need rental housing. Build to rent may have a role to play. What are the things you'd like to see change in that
Things
space?
that I would like to know. One would be, how often the 90-day no stated clause termination is used.
Right.
I have no idea how to get that one. Like some things I kind of have an idea how I can get that data. I would love to know that. How many rentals are up to healthy homes?
Yeah, that's a great one. That's a great one.
That would be really good to know. And I know it's something you've talked about, having a property register, so we actually know which properties. Might be a bit difficult because they're going to change all the time, aren't they? They'll come in and out, but you know, it'll improve our knowledge of the housing stock in New Zealand. That would be great. Some of the financial data would be really interesting to know.
Yeah.
So, for example, the Reserve Bank does a series of data based on the loan to value ratios. Sorry, we're getting a bit technical here, people.
Yeah.
Hope no one goes to sleep. But it's two series. One is the loan type by its purpose, and the other is who borrows the money. Is it a first home buyer? Is it an investor? Is it an owner-occupier? Those two series are great, but it doesn't tell me how many investors are buying new homes versus how many are just refinancing.
Yeah.
So, for example, at the moment, like the first home buyers had a great time of it in the last sort of year or so, and they were ahead of everyone else. And the property investors have recently overtaken that. And the reason I'm interested in that is because when the property investors borrow more money, it's suddenly, oh my God, the property investors are invading the market again. The poor first home buyers, aren't these guys evil? You see the stories pop up. Now, I want to be able to say, well, actually, your investors are just refinancing their loans. They're getting a loan with another bank and they're getting a lower interest rate. There's a lot of that going on. In fact, it was a record in the last month.
Right.
And I suspect that a lot of property investors are doing that. Now, I did a little bit of back working of the numbers. So you take out the first home buyers because we know that they're buying, it's a new loan. And if you take that out, actually, the first home buyers are definitely buying more homes than property investors. But I'd love to have the actual data itself from the Reserve Bank.
There must be ways to...
There's not. I've asked them.
Right. Oh.
They don't collect it in the right form.
You see, one of the frustrating things from our perspective, and I think Australia is a little bit ahead of New Zealand in this sense, and I think this is because most landlords, vast majority of landlords, use a property manager who is qualified. There's a register, so you get clean data. You know what properties are renting at more accurately. Where here, it's hard to find, and that makes it a little bit frustrating. We do a little bit of work with Velocity, which gives us what market rents are, so we're in a better position to educate investors and landlords. Some landlords don't want to increase the rent, but you know that's their choice. They want to keep the rent low for the tenants. So let's talk about some of the advocacy work that you're doing at the moment. Who you're working with, who are you talking to, and what are you trying to get across there?
Okay, so we're obviously talking to the government. So Chris Bishop, he's the sort of overall minister, but also Tama Potaka.
Yeah.
He's recently been given responsibility for a lot more in relation to rental properties.
Yeah.
And that also includes, the area of property managers.
Yeah.
So we've actually talked to him and raised the issue of property manager regulation. I know that's something that you support.
Yep.
And we broadly, our members would like to see that in place. Not 100% unified, but if it's done right, if it's a light touch, if it doesn't add too much cost and complexity, then we think it's a good thing.
Yeah.
So those are your two main government ministers. With New Zealand First, we're looking at Andy Fowler,
Yep.
the former Wellington Mayor.
Yep.
with ACT, Cameron Luxton,
Right.
and of course David Seymour, who I worked for at the last election. So he's coming along to our conference in October, so that'll be great.
Up in Hamilton, yeah.
Up in Hamilton. On the Labour side, honestly, we're just trying to talk to everybody we can. We've talked to Kieran McAnulty, and we've set him up for our rent skills course to just give him an idea of what we're doing. I would like to have, and I've asked them about this, wish me luck for getting it.
Yeah.
I would like to have a caucus workshop on property investment.
Right.
And if I get that going, I'd love to have you come along and talk at something like that.
I tell you what,
I think that'd be
years ago, I mean,
fascinating
I
for the
used to
Labour members.
chair the Real Estate Institute sector group for property management,
Yeah.
and they would, tenancy services would get tenant advocacy groups in. Landlord, Andrew King came along to it.
Yeah.
You know, I went along to it, and you'd gather a room of about 8 people, and it was great because you actually got to listen to the perspective from someone who you may not agree with, and then you can actually see. And they said, well, let's look for some common boundaries here or some common grounds and things that you need to happen. So, you know, one of my counter argument to people who say, no, the property management bill could add on cost. What you will find is property managers will be more skilled. You know, and the quality of property management across the country will improve dramatically. And with that, you get greater efficiencies, which means that you will not see, if anything, I think it will reduce cost.
Okay.
You know, that's what I think it will do.
Yeah.
And other things is, I mean, you know, we operate a trust account which is audited every quarter. Yeah. You know, that is not a necessity in this current environment, which is highly risky. You know, you want to know that your money is secure. So that's the type of things that we push as an industry.
Very important for owners to have that sort of sense of security.
Okay. So if you're talking to Labour, you'd obviously push and say, look, you know, do you think that they would, because National have reversed a lot of the changes recently.
Yeah.
Do you think if in 3 years or next year is the election, do you think, you know, if there was a change of government again, are we just going to go back to the way it was? Is it going to keep happening?
I fear that may happen. I know for a fact that Labour would bring back or would remove again the 90-day no stated clause termination. That'll be gone. Day one. We don't know what they're going to do with interest deductibility. There's no chance they'll remove ring fencing. So, and you know, there could be pressure from the Greens and from Te Pāti Māori to bring in things like rent controls in some form or other.
Yeah.
There may be a requirement for a landlord registration of some kind, which will be a huge
big undertaking. Yeah.
Massive undertaking.
But
so I do think it's quite negative. What worries me is that we don't have much time to influence them. What I would rather have is at least a 2-year National ACT coalition, New Zealand First Coalition, which will give us more time to talk to Labour and hopefully persuade them of the rightness of our cause. Because,
I mean, I host a podcast with a couple of people who I'm involved in a conference with.
Yeah.
And last night, you know, it wasn't last night, it was the week before, we were talking about that rents went up quite significantly in the time when Labour were in government. Yeah. We've actually now got a unique situation where we seem to have, from our perspective, an oversupply of rental property. And rents are actually, they've flatlined. And in some cases, they're going back. I look at data on Trade Me on OneHub, which we get access to. Not everywhere, but certainly.
There's some big drops.
There's some big drops, and good friends with a company in Wellington, and they're telling me that properties which were renting for $1,200 a few years ago are now $800, $850. That's a huge drop.
Yeah.
So, you know, my point being, does the political party who's in power have an influence on rents, or is it just market conditions? And if you want to, the best way to avoid rent controls is to just make sure we've got sufficient supply, because that controls the market.
That is actually the key. So supply and demand is the key determinant of rents.
Right.
Again, there's so much interesting research out here. The Reserve Bank of Australia did some research on how much do interest rates influence rents, and they found almost nothing.
Nothing, yeah. Doesn't surprise me.
I know, but if you said that out in the world, people go, oh yeah, landlords always put up rents when the interest rates go up. Well, yes, there's more pressure to put up rents, and yes, maybe if you had an under market rent, you might then think, oh, I actually need to put it up. I'm sorry, guys.
Yeah.
But overall, it doesn't influence because supply and demand is what sets the rent.
Yeah. Yeah.
So at the moment, we've got more supply. Maybe demand's a bit lower. I mean, immigration's down a bit. So yeah, rents are coming down, and by big numbers. Now, what I find interesting about this is that Labor and National are starting to coalesce on what is needed to bring in a proper resolution, which is to build more houses.
Yeah.
If we have more houses, then we can much more strongly argue that the rental market should basically, within reasonable parameters, be left to its own devices.
Yeah.
Because market competition will force standards up and will keep the rents down. But we don't have that.
No.
The negative side of looking at that is that when we have a shortage of properties, when the crunch comes and all the property values go up and the rents go up, who is pointed to as the villain? The property investor.
Yeah.
And the property manager to a certain extent.
Yeah, it's the same. It's happened with real estate agents. They drive up the price.
Oh, terrible.
They're doing the job. They're basically providing, they're negotiating on behalf of the vendor to try and get the best price. That's what they're paid to do.
Absolutely. Imagine if you were selling a house and your agent was like, well, let's take a bit less.
Well, guys, I mean, we're coming to the end, but if you've got any questions, we've got a little Q&A, or we've got a little chat. The Q&A doesn't seem to be working, unfortunately, but if you want to type in a question in the chat, we can see it come through. And if you've got any questions that you want to ask Matt, please fire away. Coming back onto, NZPIF and NZPIA, if you want to get in touch, what's the best thing to do? How do you become a member?
Best thing to do is go to our website, www.nzpif.co.nz. That'll take you to the website. There's a big orange button on there that says join, or you can have a look around all the different pages and see what we're about.
Yeah.
You can see who we have other discounts with. So I mentioned Bunnings and Initio, the insurance. There's My Rent as well if you're a self-managing landlord, and there's a few other bits and pieces in there too. And we do hope to have some more partner suppliers coming along soon.
Well, with Property Brokers have committed to support, because we believe in advocacy. We need more landlords. The country needs more landlords. Hi, Matt and David. Any thoughts around the tribunal and delays for the hearing?
Ah, yes. Now, this is
Thanks,
a good one.
Darlene.
Very good question. Thank you, Darlene. We met last month with the principal adjudicator from the tribunal. So this was a bit groundbreaking. The last principal adjudicator didn't want to meet with us. Didn't want to meet with any...
Jenny Robson.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not...
She used to be an adjudicator here in Palmerston North.
Oh, okay. Well, she wasn't helpful as a principal adjudicator.
She was a good adjudicator. I would say she was a very good adjudicator. Yep.
Well, fantastic that we've now got an open door. So we had a very good meeting with the principal adjudicator and with... I've forgotten her name, sorry, it's just left me, but from MB, Head of Tenancy Services.
Is that Kath Watson?
No, it's not Kat. It's one of her colleagues.
Yeah, okay.
Name's just left me. Shortly after that, we met with the Minister, and it is fair to say that he was very concerned about the delays when he realised the extent of the delays. And to be fair to him, he hadn't realised this before because it's only newly his responsibility. So we've been given quite a lot of hopeful advice from the Tenancy Tribunal. They are trying. They're having more hearings online, which is good. But they have an inherent problem, and that is that since 2022, the number of cases has gone up by 43%.
Yeah, I've got data on that. I can show you some of it.
And they've increased in complexity, but they've had no increase in resources.
So the drop, they had a big drop COVID because they removed the 14-day notice in effect. You had to have 60 days before an arrears. So we had a very small amount of applications because all the rent arrears had gone. Now we're back to pre-COVID levels, and it is frustrating because when we get certainly big cases, and I actually asked an adjudicator. Because I was involved in a big hearing going in Hawke's Bay, and I said, look, can we do more, where you just submit evidence? Like one of the suggestions I've had is that you remove rent arrears only applications, because the tenancy tribunal is dispute resolution. If there is just purely rent arrears, it's not a dispute, it's a fact.
Now, I've got an update on that too,
Yeah.
unfortunately, and that's not a good one.
No.
And you wrote a good article on that a few years ago, and
There's one recently in the Property Investor magazine.
Okay, so we push that as well. We would love to see a separate group, but the problem is the statistics they report are actually slightly misleading, not intentionally, but they say that there's, I think it's about 75% arrears disputes,
Yeah.
but they are lumped with
With
other
other
disputes.
with other disputes. Yeah.
So
yeah.
when we met with them, they said maybe there's around 2%
Is that all?
that are only tenancy
purely-
only.
Jeez.
Now, we are waiting for an update on the exact numbers. We've asked for that to be clarified, but that kind of shoots that down.
Right.
So unless there's a different way that we can work with them or work with your clients, landlords, property investors, to say, okay, if you've got rent arrears, just submit that and worry about everything else later. Maybe that could work, but I think there's quite a lot of more work to do before we could do something like that.
Maybe
it's a real bummer because
Yeah.
it was a very elegant solution.
Maybe the solution's AI adjudicators and just
The other one is the RTA law changes do bring in the ability to look at more cases on the papers.
But when I spoke to this adjudicator, and he's the 2IC, Rex Woodhouse, he's basically saying it's not really going to speed up that much at all.
That's
and
'cause
so
if
frustrations all around.
Yep.
I think the best thing is try and avoid going and try and get a resolution. And look, I'm not advocating.
Fast track mediation
Yeah.
was raised as a way of getting things resolved quickly.
Yeah, I would not advocate using the 90 days just to get rid of a tenant who you've got a dispute with, because that would be deemed to be retaliatory notice.
Yeah, and then you'll be in trouble.
And then you're in serious trouble. We've got probably time for one more question because we've got to head off to the Manawatu Investors, Property Investors Association soon. Ruth's asking the question here: do you think it's possible that ring fencing rules will ever be removed? What's your opinion?
That's
there?
another great question. Ever is a very long time, so I remain hopeful.
All right, let's say in next 10 years.
Okay, so we asked this very question of David Seymour
Yeah.
at our conference last year, and he said it's just not politically viable at the moment.
Yeah.
I think we will be absolutely keeping on pushing for this because it is a really important aspect of the whole rental market. Young people coming into the business who may be working, they have a big mortgage, if they can't offset their losses against their working income, it makes it so much harder for them. So we're actually excluding younger people from the business.
Yeah.
And it keeps rents down, which is a positive thing as well, right? Because if you are able to offset some of those losses, there's less pressure on you to
And I
increase
certainly
rents.
think you'll see with landlords coming off these higher interest rates onto lower ones, it's got to give them a little bit more money in the back pocket, and they're not going to be so needy for those.
You get a bit more headroom, yeah. So do I think it's possible within 10 years? I'm going to say yes, I think we can do it, but on the proviso that we get a much better housing market, we get more houses built, and we get a much more normalised rental property market.
And you have more members for the New Zealand Property Investors Federation and
100%.
Association. So
Join us, the more voices we have, the better.
Okay. All right. So we're all in this together, guys, and we want to make it as easy as possible for investors. We're fully aware of the duty of care that we have for our tenants to make sure that they're living in warm, dry homes.
Yep.
The people who are out there watching, if you haven't got your house compliant yet, that time is running out very drastically. So please make sure that you're hitting that deadline. Thank you so much for joining us. This recording will be available as well afterwards if you want to listen to us again. And make sure you get onto those websites. What's the websites? Just type in
www.nzpif.co.nz.
Okay, excellent. And Matt, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for joining us, and thank you all for tuning in. Have a pleasant evening.
Thank you.